Live from Derbyshire, this is The Sunday Lunch Show with Brent Poland. And you are listening live. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org or join in the conversation by downloading the Podbean app and following Teachers Talk Radio. Hashtag TT Radio.
Well, it's all about trying to remember how to do everything, isn't it? After the first show back after the New Year. Happy New Year to everybody. It's me, Adam Spence, with Brent Poland today. How are you doing as you start the new year, Brent?
Well, I'm absolutely soaked. I had to bring my daughter out to a play date, and it was absolutely bucketing down. Now the sun split the tree. So yeah, I'm okay. I'm apart from a little wet. I chose to wear a pair of flip-flops. I don't know why. I chose to wear a pair of flip-flops and I walked out the door, but hey, planning is not always one of my strong points.
Yeah, well, I've been back a week, nearly. I've done I was back Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So all that relaxation's been lost. I feel tired already. It's straight in.
You were back when I was off this week, so I had the back end because I'm back tomorrow. And I'm having the Sunday pre-dreads going back to school already.
You got the shakes.
Yeah, you always have that, don't you? When you go back to school, you think it's worse with a 6-week term, isn't it? Because you're always thinking, I've lost my ability to speak to the kids, and all of a sudden everything comes at you so fast. Maybe it's my age, but I reach that point where I get overloaded, and I almost think, just let me get back into the classroom and do the thing I'm doing. No new ideas, no new initiatives. No, I've got this, I've got that, the other. I think the last Christmases we've always come back into a kind of storm. Obviously with the pandemic and everything else, but we didn't really have the most restful Christmases. So this is, for me, has been the probably most restful Christmas I've had in a couple of years, because we've had a good break, and I think a lot of us were crawling over the line come December. And yes, we're seeing an increase in the flu, the scarlet fever, the COVID situation starting to rear its head again. And of course, we've got the looming strikes coming up. So education seems to be back in the agenda. It seems to be back in flavour, politically speaking. And it means that, we are back in the public limelight. And obviously the NHS crisis filters into education. And I think as much as we've had a break, it'll not take us long. Within a couple of days, we're back into the kind of like, when's the next after?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of my colleagues just went almost like immediately to bed, which is really frustrating kind of for them. And they didn't, I know one of them, PE teacher that I work with, kind of didn't wake up until kind of Boxing Day. He was that ill, because everyone had kind of caught everything. I'd felt a little bit kind of woozy, but I couldn't work out whether it was a stomach infection or just the quantity of wine, cream and butter I was consuming in a short amount of time.
It's always a strange thing to. I'm lucky that my wife is. My mother-in-law was a primary school teacher for 40 odd years, so she understands the physiological problems that we teachers have, and the exhaustion of almost a couple of days after you finish. You're just literally in recovery mode. You're almost, you turn into a bird, don't you? And of course, when you've got families and children and responsibilities, you've got people coming out and you're going, let's do this. And you're going, I just really need to catch up on a bit of sleep and recharge my batteries. So hopefully you've all had a good Christmas to recharge those batteries, because we're back at it again. And whether you're back like Adam is, or you're about to go back tomorrow like
I think, to be fair, I think it's only Derbyshire. I think the whole of Centre Parks and holiday resorts up and down the country are just teachers in Derby.
So you're saying I've taken the opportunity to probably have a cheaper break.
Oh, yeah. My friend said, I just interrupt, my friend says, because he did this last year, because somehow Derby and Derbyshire just got a bit out of sync with everybody. He says there's a funny moment when you're at Centre Parks and you go just after the New Year, and they give you a couple of days where they're still in the kind of festive period. 2 days in, they start taking all the decorations down whilst you're at whilst you're at the park. So there's a weird moment where everything kind of gets kind of a little bit depressing for a kind of week.
Well, it's still Christmas for me, but not for everybody else.
Everyone starts packing up, which is.
But it was weird because we got we normally have a Christmas in one place. You know, we do the shared Christmases on New Year's, so we rotate one Christmas with one set of in-laws, one Christmas with the other set of in-laws. But that means obviously there's a trip across the Irish Sea, which was a bit choppy this time. And in doing so, it was the quietest ferry crossing ever because exactly that. I was remarking to my wife, going, why is it so quiet? And when you think you're that person there first in the queue going, are we got the right boat? Do we have the right place, the right time? And it was because we were out of sync with the holidays and the roads the last week. It was interesting watching everybody gearing back up to go into school, and I'm not. But then I had the opposite, where I think I hadn't pushed up to Christmas, right? And we had that discussion in our last show about what we should do, the fun things before Christmas. So I didn't. I taught up until the Wednesday. We were finished on a Thursday, and on a Thursday morning, we took part in a pantomime, which overran because there was a lot of ad-libbing, and it was just good fun. And we had a really good end of term where, you know, the staff all got together and we did our Secret Santa, which is always good fun.
And what were you on the pantomime? I was trying to look at your photographs.
I kind of made it up as I went along. I think my role was an angel.
Oh, yes.
So I was an angel. Which is hilarious because my daughter also played an angel recently, and she has this little song that she's been singing over all of Christmas. And it's the cutest thing. She's only 4, and she goes, "We're angels from heaven, angels from heaven." So, and every time I hear the word nativity play, I'm reminded about Love Actually.
Okay.
I'm waiting for that moment where my daughter's going to be dressed up as an octopus. But luckily, she was just the innkeeper this time. So Christmas done with.
I'll try and get Brent to share the pictures because I thought for a minute it was Beyond Bjork, not an angel.
There was a lot of makeup and a lot of things had to be done to make me look like an angel. Not look like a fallen angel, but that was a different matter entirely. But we did. We had a little bit of fun near the end, and the students played along, and it was interesting. What was interesting about it was the younger children, and the children who I think we've lost out in a couple of years, like the year 8s and the year 9s, hadn't seen us do things like that. And one of the children remarked, was that normal? Because we do always do like the 12 days, on the 12th day of Christmas, my true love said to me. We always do that, and staff sing that on stage, which is very traditional. It's been done apparently since 1967. It's one of our school traditions. School traditions are always important. And some of the younger kids were like, "What, you do this every year?" Yeah. And we also did a Band-Aid song, so we all contributed towards a Band-Aid song.
We got a bit of a preview, didn't we?
Yes.
Last week. If you want to listen back to the show last week, before Christmas, we had an incredible Bono from Brent.
You know, what can I say? You know, I'm an Irishman. That's what we do. We sing and we talk. We educate. I'm such a stereotype. I am a walking stereotype. Apart from Mrs. Brown's Boys, which I cannot stand, and we're not starting a conversation about that.
No,
Get it off the television.
Let's not do that.
Get it off the television. I'm sorry if I'm going to lose some people right now, but Mrs. Brown's Boys, done, finished, had enough of it. So that's Christmas done and dusted.
Yeah. So we're sat in the staff room. Well, me, my staff, I share a staff room largely with the maths team. We'll come on to the reasons why that is so big in our school later on in the show. But Rishi Sunak stood up and said the following.
Thousands of adults the opportunity to get the basic numerical skills they need. But we're one of the few countries not to require our children to study some form of maths up to the age of 18. Right now, just half of all 16 to 19-year-olds study any maths at all. Yet in a world where data is everywhere and statistics underpin every job, letting our children out into that world without those skills is letting our children down. I am now making numeracy a central objective of our education system. Now that doesn't have to mean a compulsory A-level in maths for everyone, but we will work with the sector to move towards all children studying some form of maths to 18.
Okay, so I think as most teachers, going back to the first couple of days, this wasn't expected. It wasn't something that was on anyone's radar particularly, was it? It kind of completely came out of the blue. obviously he was doing a keynote speech. Largely, I think everyone thought he was going to address some of the kind of big issues in the country in terms of the NHS, industrial action and everything, and
cost of living crisis.
But then, boom, the big headline kind of came and certainly sent a tidal wave through maths departments, school departments, staff rooms, SLTs, and that type of thing. So that was the big thing that kind of hit us kind of straight away as we came back. One day.
The first thing that hit people straight away coming back was the Department of Education, God bless them. A couple of years ago, they were the ones that were having parties during lockdowns. Work gatherings.
Yeah.
So when we're saying about the children having fun things before Christmas, we don't mean the guys in charge having fun things before Christmas, because they literally did take the biscuit on that, and probably more than stronger than biscuits. But the fact is that they produced, again, a humdinger. On the 2nd of January, they released a press release, and the press release was something along the lines of, the number of scarlet fever cases is high, the head teachers union has warned for people to be lessons and Christmas holidays, flu and COVID cases are currently circulating very high, and Susan Hopkins, Chief Medical Advisor, said, press release by the Department of Education, if your child is unwell and has a fever, they should stay at home from school or nursery until they feel better, until the fever is resolved. She also stressed the importance of washing hands. Yes, we're back to singing Happy Birthday and washing hands. And catching coughs and sneezes in tissues. Really, this is the in-depth advice. Adults should also stay at home when unwell. Right. So that's saying that we teachers, when we don't feel well, stay at home. Interesting when some academy policies are hunting us down when we have a couple of days off. And wear a face covering if they go out. Whoa. Wear a face covering. Is that the return of face masks? Interesting. Those who are ill should avoid healthcare settings. Well, I think that's a given at the moment, considering the crisis that we're currently facing. And vulnerable people less urgent, she asked. This was a back-to-school advice was issued amid high levels of flu, COVID-19 and scarlet fever. That's the 2nd of January. That's not exactly what your head teachers want in their in-tray. Is kind of vague advice. And don't get me wrong, it's perfectly valid, and everything that's said in that is sound. It's just the wrong time, and it's not exactly what we want to be walking back into. And then again, also, we're walking back into this one. Professor Susan Hopkins, again, the Chief Medical Advisor to the UK Health Security Agency, says people who feel unwell should consider wearing face masks to stop the spread of flu. These are fears that high levels of flu, COVID, and strep A could overwhelm hospitals amid warnings that patients are already having to wait for days in accident emergency departments. They said that this could minimise the spread of cold, flu, and strep A in schools by keeping sick children off school, washing hands regularly, and using clean tissues. She added, it's important to minimise the spread of infection in schools and other education, healthcare, and childcare settings. That's also nurseries. The NAHT said, that's the Head Teachers Union, does appear to be an unusually high level of illness around the moment. Advice from the government is welcome to give schools and parents clarity on what and when children should stay at home. Here's the problem with that. Where are you with attendance figures? When schools are being judged by Ofsted as inadequate because their attendance figures, do you turn around and say, sorry, the government advice says for these kids to stay off? What do you turn around to a member of staff? As a union rep, I sometimes have members of staff sitting down to me and saying, I'm worried about my attendance is going to be used against me. We are in a situation where the right hand is judging you and telling you, get to work. And, the parents, we've missed too many school days. So there's a bit of mixed messaging there. Parents get fined if their children don't go to school. So for me, yes, this is welcome advice. But again, on the 2nd of January, would that not be better coming out? Was the situation not already apparent at the end of December before we left for the Christmas break? Why do they always do this? When we go back in January, they give us some advice and you think, has this really been thought through? Can you come up with more concrete, discernible measures? We know what we went through in the last couple of years, and one of our previous guests on, obviously, Karen Bales, who, and others are calling for better buildings, better mitigations in schools. The fact remains we have the most overcrowded classrooms in Western Europe. Fact remains we have a recruitment and retention crisis, which is going to increase class sizes because as we lose teachers, we're having to combine classes, which puts more children into cramped classrooms, which are not fit for purpose. Germany, November 2020, put in ventilation systems in. It really has to be looked at. And again, going back to the MADS idea, it's got to be judged on its own merits. But if I wanted the Prime Minister to be speaking about education, I would have expected him to be speaking about the public health crisis, the funding crisis, the social crisis, the mental health crisis, the fact that education schools are now, in trouble when it comes to finances. Their budgets are being cramped. Food for the children. We're talking free school meals. There is a plethora of issues out there. And you and I had this discussion about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
If I had a Maslow's hierarchy of needs for schools at the moment, where would I score the teaching of maths to the age of 18 in our Maslow hierarchy of needs of the people at the coal face, at the chalk face, the people who are running the show, the people on the ground, the foot soldiers? It strikes to me almost like the First World War generals sitting 20 miles behind enemy, behind their own lines, dictating to the soldiers about the battle conditions. When, here's a grand idea. I feel like Blackadder goes forth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have like Baldric. I have a great idea.
Yeah. I have a plan. Yeah.
I have a plan. And you're like, that's not what we need in education. We need the basics to be done. We kind of need the basics. And that's upset me a little bit, because you come back to it and you go like, what are we coming back into? And we're coming back into, again, a situation that probably could have been better planned for with a bit of foresight. We know that schools are always going to be problematic for spreading coughs and colds and sneezes and flus. Any NQT will tell you, your first 2 or 3 years of teaching, you're a walking petri dish.
Yeah.
Or you're not. You have to build up the resistance to it. So that's an interesting one. Okay, we're going to come along to our...
I just want to kind of cover the two things together, really.
Yeah.
That we talked before about kind of strategic planning, and that's why it was kind of a bit of a shock, really. It's kind of just an out of the blue comment, and it'd be interesting to know kind of where it goes. And I think it'd be interesting to maybe have a show on maths in particular. Maybe if here's another question that we come back to in the future. Are certain subjects, should students carry on with them? Like we had a discussion, why maths? Why not literacy? Why not history? Why not arts? Why not some of the softer skills? Could be, well, I'm doing softer skills in inverted commas because I don't really think they're soft life skills. Why maths has been particularly chosen rather than any else? And to kind of confirm the rampage of this, I've done my best to kind of edit the clip as much as possible, but anyone that picked up kind of Simon Pegg's comments, I'll just play it for you now. I've done my utmost to kind of take out any other problems with this, but
we are politically neutral in this as well.
Political neutral, but this is what Simon Pegg had to say on the comment.
So Rishi Sunak, our unmandated, unelected Prime Minister, twice removed, has decided that it should be compulsory for children to learn maths up until the age of 18. What about arts and humanities and fostering this country's amazing reputation for creativity and self-expression? What about that? What about the kids who don't want to do maths? I hated maths. I dropped maths as soon as I could, and I've never needed it other than the skill set I acquired at the age of 12. But no.
That was Simon Pegg there. Okay, I think I've done very well with my editing skills then to take out.
He goes in a bit of a rant.
Yeah, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. I mean, I do. I mean, although I found it very entertaining, I do disagree with the fact that this comment of you never use maths. I find that hard to believe. I think maybe he's just not thinking about the application of maths maybe going forward. And I've listened to some interesting podcasts over the holiday. Particularly, I picked up a guy called Stephen Snodgrass, and he can pick you up. I'll put a link on our show notes, but he does a great show with the guys from the Freakonomics Radio about how important applied mathematics are to nature, to economics, to humanities, to you were saying earlier about geography, and there is another way in. So maybe we hold judgment on the statement around mathematics because we don't really understand it, because he flips halfway through the speech back to numeracy, then to data, then to statistics. So be interesting to know where that goes. I in my own school at the minute are trying to run a huge financial literacy program using the Young Money Matters program. We've got HSBC involved with that. So there are ways to do it. So it's not always bad. But one of the things we want to just say now, so you've got a kind of heads up to kind of call in for 2:00, is we do want to have a big discussion around do we help children far too much in schools? And that's going to be the focus of today's show, because I don't know how this happened, but I think we both kind of ended up with social media tweets and articles sent to us about parenting. I don't know if it's because people go home, journalists go home and spend time with their family. They'll then sort of focus on parenting for a bit. But I picked up an article in the FT. You picked up an article in Huffington Post, didn't you?
Yeah.
Almost at the same time around this. So it's obviously on trend, as it were, to think about kind of, are we currently doing too much for our children, as in our own children, or for the children that we teach?
Yeah, it's the two aspects of, are we overdoing our job? Is our compassion too much? I.e., we're almost doing far too much. We're not enabling these children. We're spoon feeding them. We are all about the product now. It's all about the data. It's all about the exam results, and it's all about what you need to do to get those exam results. And in essence, are we losing the value of education in the grind of it's all about the league tables and the exam results? And whatever you need to do to get those children over the line, you do to get those exam results, because you are ultimately judged not on the quality of education you deliver for a life. You know, the fact that children may contact you 10 years later and say, thanks for those lessons. The fact that you may be that inspirational teacher from, Captain, my captain, sir, that those kids will turn around and go, wow, you were the most amazing teacher ever. You've changed how I think. You changed how I behave. You had that impact. And that's, all of us who are teachers always have that one or two individuals that made such a difference, those rescuing factor teachers. But how would those actual teachers fare in the current education system? Would they be hounded out? Would they be destroyed because the mavericks in them don't play by these new rules? And these new rules are, it is about exam results, and it is about enabling the children to get over that threshold about the grades. And in that spirit of that competition, it's a bit like, I feel like a Premier League football situation, where you now as a teacher are the manager of a football team. Yeah. And ultimately the manager of the football team is the one that always gets it.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, well, hold on a second here. That manager of the football team is responsible for a certain amount of things. They pick the team, that's correct. Sometimes those things are outside their control. They have injuries. Sometimes they can't buy the players they can't. So they have financial constraints. They might be in a small club. I think there's such a massive parallel between football clubs and schools, because you have your head teacher, again, like your board of governors, or who might be your boss as the manager, and say to you, this is the style of football I want you to play, this is my philosophy, and you have to buy into that philosophy, or you're not a manager in that. But here's when it comes down to it: when those 11 players get on that football pitch, what control does the manager have? At what stage? And you often find this sometimes, that the players turn around and collectively say, I'm sorry, it's not the manager's the problem, it's somebody within our dressing room. Yeah. It's some of the players that must take responsibility. And it's a bit like the Prime Minister, a bit like the Cabinet. At what stage is the Prime Minister responsible, and at what stage is the Cabinet responsible? And the same goes for schools. And this is my premise, is at what stage are the children responsible for their exam grades? Because it seems to me it has become now all on the teacher. The parents demand that we do these things. And I think, unfortunately, and it's the good cartoon that I've hunted out, and I'll put it on our socials, explain these bad grades. In 1969, you have the teacher who's showing the grades to the parents, and the parents are chastising their child. And the teacher's sort of sitting there going, look, there you go, there's the child's grades. And the child is getting it from the parents and the teacher because they're their grades. And we see the teacher of today, and we see the child sniggering and laughing, and we see the two parents pointing to the child's grades, and we see a nervous teacher who's getting it in the neck from the parent. And that's where I think the flip has happened. And I think that cartoon was about 2010, and that's why I think things started to go a little bit into the realms of, and it might be that this is responsible for a recruitment and retention problem, because we are now seemingly solely responsible for the child's education. And that does not match a lot with the action research of people like Hattie.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that.
Yeah.
What I want to do is we want to give you this kind of heads up, because we really want your interaction with this. Either on social media, or if you'd like to call in or text the show or email the show, that would be great as well.
Do you agree? Do you think we go too far? Do you think that we are too good? I mean, because that's the thing. That's my thing. I'm a better teacher, I think, than a lot of the teachers that taught me. And I often think, what more can I physically do? What more blood, sweat, and tears can I give to these children? And at some stage, I'm looking at them going, you've gone into that exam hall and you haven't performed. What more am I meant to have done? Go into your, calling your house at 8 o'clock in the evening, the night before an exam, and say, "Excuse me, are you studying?"
Well, I've done that the morning before. Got people.
You've gone and retrieved students on the day of the exam.
Yeah, that's happened. Yeah.
Do you know? And this infuriates me that children don't turn up for an exam that costs like £50 or £60.
Yeah.
I look, and maybe I'm old school in this, and I am sometimes old school in a lot of my views, and sometimes very modern in others. If we say, for instance, made the children pay for their exams that they missed, and I know that some people won't like that because that might, discriminate against certain individuals. But here's the problem: the kids don't. It's not my exam; it's the school's exam. Or they seem to think they don't take ownership and responsibility.
Yeah.
But it goes the other way. When the kids do well, and one of the first things I often say is, "They're not my exam results; they're the children's exam results. They're the one that sat the exam."
Yeah.
When I failed my driving test. And I failed spectacularly. It wasn't my driving instructor's fault that I went the wrong direction, put the windscreen wipers on, couldn't turn them off. It was in Derby. I got caught on a hill.
Yeah.
I went the wrong.
It's important to say. I think the Derby driving test is probably one of the hardest in the country.
It's a horrible place. In my defence, it's a horrible place to navigate. Yeah. And in my defence, I used an unfamiliar car. But I absolutely, completely failed it. And afterwards, I had a horrible thing of like, how did I do that? What happened to me? And then I realised I'm just like the children. I have to do that reflection. Second time around, I absolutely aced it because I learned from my mistakes.
Yeah.
But I didn't turn around to my driving instructor who was sitting in the back of the car. And as I got out of the car, the first thing I did to my driving instructor was, "I am really sorry, Eddie. That was not..." And he looked at me, and it was almost, he was the teacher, I was the child.
Yeah.
He looked at me and says, "Don't worry, Brent, you're a good driver. You just had a bad day. It happens a lot." And that's the same with the exams. I have to turn around to children sometimes and say, "Why did they not do well in the exam?" And then what do? "Oh, you've let me down. You've let yourself down. Doom on you." My best friend failed his English 3 times. He's now very successfully working in media and in television.
Yeah.
And he got 0 GCSEs at the age of 16. He got a first-class honours degree at 23 years old because he had resilience, stoicism, he had the rescuing factors of supportive parents, he had desire, hunger. Those things were not put there by the education system. Those things were intrinsic to him. Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, we both had a really good art teacher we both really enjoyed. One reason we became good friends because we enjoyed our art lessons. And yes, there is a correlation between my best exam result at GCSE and my favourite teacher and the one subject I worked the most. Because, yes, he was a factor, but he wasn't the only factor. I had to have some desire to do it. Yeah. I chose it at GCSE. I enjoyed doing it. He made it. He facilitated it. But ultimately speaking, I'm the one that did all the work, not him. I'm the one that chose to stay behind after school and do all the hard work on my own time. And what comes down to it, this is the choice that children have. I often say to them, "What's your job at the moment?" And they look at me funny and I say, "What's your job? What's your occupation?" What's a bus driver's job? A bus driver's job is to drive a bus. What's a prison officer's job? To keep prisoners in prison. What's a doctor's job? To treat sick patients. What's a teacher's job? To teach. So what's their job? They're students.
Yeah.
Do they actually study? How good of students? And I think a lot of
do they have the skills? Do they even have the skills?
Exactly. A lot of the focus is always on the teaching element, not on the quality of the learning environment or the learner or actually how they learn. I think we've lost the semantics of about how we get these children to learn. In the rush to get these kids over the line, I think we lose the art of teaching because we're being forced into systems which I think, I'll be honest with you, are shackling these children. Because a lot of that stuff, like Hattie says, is creativity. It's the maverick. It's the juicy stuff. It's the stuff that takes a risk. But teachers that take risks now run the risk of what? They run the risk of stepping outside.
It's about the comfort zone of everyone else. Yeah.
And therefore, you are being almost drilled. It's almost becoming very drill. This is what we do in this school. This is what you must. I have to turn around and have somebody say to me, "The child must underline their title, underline their title." And I'm going, underline the title is really the thing they're going to remember from me, isn't it? Yeah. That's the thing that's really going to make their life skill complete. Oh, look, they know today's date. Oh, what fantastic! They got that on their phone, and it's like things like the analog. I have an old clock with watch hands on it. I didn't realize the 15-year-old the other day says, "How long is the lesson? How long got left for the exam?"
Yeah.
I says, "Well, work it out from the clock." And the child looked at me and went, "I don't use a clock." They didn't know how at 15 years old how to use a clock. But then I could go, "Oh, that's terrible. What are the kids being taught these days?" And then after the exam, they said to me, "I use my phone and I use everything's digital."
Yeah, moved.
And then I says, well, you did learn this at primary school. And the child was honest and says, yeah, I learned that stuff at primary school years ago, but I've forgotten all about it anyway. In other words, they're being taught to do something for a certain short period of time to pass an exam, and therefore, once it's done, they forget about it. Because I think they're overloaded. I think a lot of the children turn and say to me, they just feel as if they're overloaded. And in doing so, we're all just coming at them and at them and at them. And the problem then is, it comes down to this. We get it when the kids don't do well. Our reputation suffers. And I think parents buy into that as well. Oh, that teacher gets good grades. You think, that teacher gets good grades. What do they do to get the good grades? What price is to be paid?
And how long can they do it for?
And what happens when they have a bad year?
Yeah.
What happens if they have the pandemic is shucking a couple of apples out of the trees because attendance has been up the left. I sat down and tried to analyse my data, and I'm thinking, going like, are we judging this as a normal year? But then somebody goes, well, how do you compare your subject to another subject? And I'm like, hold on a second here.
You can't do that.
But you do have it. Oh, that department's doing well because that department's done. So did you think about talking to that department? Well, fantastic for them.
I guess they're trying to find just something to. Anyway, we've got loads of stuff there that we want to kind of save for that kind of main discussion point. Do you want to kind of go through some headlines, or should we hit the news?
Well, we'll hit the news and then we'll go through the headlines afterwards. Yep.
Cool. We'll catch you in a bit then.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
With the majority of pupils returning to schools this week, the new year has brought new announcements and new challenges for many in the education sector. Government advice about illness and staying away from education settings if you're sick was shared, and the issue of strikes remains a hot topic. Pressures on school leaders continue, with The Guardian reporting that many head teachers are broken, at risk of heart attacks and exhausted as a result of the erosion of services for children and families, meaning the burden of support is falling on the shoulders of schools too often. So, as the new year begins on a duller note than any of us might like, here are the top stories that have caught the eye of Teachers Talk Radio News this week. In Manchester, the Morning Star reports that students at one of the city's universities have launched a rent strike. Students at the University of Manchester are using the strike to press their demands for an end to what they describe as extortionate rents and their requests for a 30% cash rebate. Organisers say that more than 30 students per day are joining the protest, spurred by the combined effects of the cost of living crisis and poor quality accommodation provided at too high a cost. According to the National Union of Students, half of England's students are facing financial difficulty, with 3/4 of these saying they expect this to have an impact on their studies. A previous rent strike in Manchester in 2021 was successful, and students hope to replicate this outcome in this new wave of action. FE Week reports on Ofqual's decision to disband its committee of experts who advise on exam standards in favour of a more flexible approach on policy advice. The Standards Advisory Group has been active for more than a decade and was set up to help the exam watchdog maintain standards. Ofqual confirmed that the committee will be replaced to reflect a broader remit, such as expansions in vocational and technical qualifications and apprenticeships. Ofqual has faced criticism and upheaval over decisions and communication during the pandemic. Deputy Chief Regulator Michael Hanton described the change as positive and will secure quality and fairness for all those who take and use qualifications. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who recently announced his ambition to have all young people study maths to the age of 18, has faced a barrage of criticism about his plan. The iNewspaper reports that Robin Walker, chair of the Commons Education Select Committee, feels that the PM should be focusing more on the early years sector to boost education levels instead. He calls the maths plan highly challenging, citing the nationwide shortage of subject specialists as the biggest barrier. Mr Walker, Conservative MP for Worcester and a former Education Minister, highlighted issues around recruitment and retention, as people with maths qualifications are quite employable elsewhere. So it is a highly competitive market when it comes to drawing people into teaching. He added that focus on the early years sector would be the most effective way of supporting children, describing it as embarrassing that England's childcare system is rated so poorly when compared to other countries. The AI also carries news of the decision by Catherine Birbalsingh to step down from her role as social mobility czar. Ms Birbalsingh, once dubbed Britain's strictest head teacher, has made the surprise announcement because she believes she comes with too much baggage, going on to say that her propensity to voice opinions that are considered controversial puts the Commission in jeopardy. Ms Birbalsingh wrote of her decision in a column in Schools Week. A controversial figure for many, but with an equally vociferous fan base, Ms Birbalsingh also commented that she felt the role of social mobility czar meant that she was becoming a politician, but that this was not a skill set she wished to develop. Finally, ITV News reports on how parts of a Turkish Airlines plane have been delivered to a school in Alveston, South Gloucestershire, to be turned into a new library. The project, named Flying High by pupils, will see parts of the plane turned into a new outdoor reading area. Full details can be found on the ITV website, with artist impressions of the final project showing children and adults enjoying the new space. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, did you know I've been doing this show for a year now? Well, if you didn't, now you do, so shower me in gifts and love. I'm kidding. But there is one person or group of people I want you to think about as this term draws to a close. Your tech support. They may, in your mind, be the people that say no to a lot of stuff. They may stop pupils playing games and stop a lot of the web getting into your classroom. But they keep you, your data, and your network safe. This week, as some of us are off and others are desperate to be, roll on Wednesday, spare a thought for your techie. They'll be coming in over the break to patch and update. They'll be taking those broken machines and making them work again. These people, who in most schools are like ghosts, if Charles Dickens had had the privilege of tech support, they'd have been the spirits of modern day make do and mend. They wouldn't be draped in chains and padlocks, but come bearing an endless acceptable use policy. As you wind down, or if you have already, a thank you to your tech support will make your new year that little bit easier. Remember, next time you use tech in your lessons, everything is working because of them. As always, I'd love to hear what you want to know about tech. Let us know at TTR 2022. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech. Have a lovely break.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you for just staying with us while the news was on. Obviously, today's big question is, are we doing too much for our children in schools? We were just having a discussion during the news there. You know, is that a question that can even be answered? Brent's just shared upon social media that classic cartoon about the change of roles, really, from where the responsibility has shifted over time. And it does feel sometimes working in schools that change of responsibility has moved more on to the teacher rather than the students and the parents themselves. That kind of analogy that I liked just before the news about the kind of football manager is somebody always looking for a scalp if something goes wrong. And maybe that's the thing that's kind of snuck into society. Is society moved towards that blame culture a lot more and trying to find someone to blame? You're the paid professional. It was on your watch. You should have known. You should have been doing this, etc., etc. Rather than the focus on how the child is actually learning. What are they doing behind the scenes? Because ultimately, I don't know how you feel about this, Brent, but the things that I've taken responsibility for have been the things that then stayed with me, and I've had the greater impact on my life kind of going forward.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I always said to parents at parents' evening, and you get that with children come in at 11 years old, and the parents like, what level are they at? What progress are they making? And I'm like, it's a child. I often use the analogy of a marathon. Says, a marathon's a 24-mile. All right, you have some children, you want to push children too young, too fast. It's like the marathon runner who sprints too early.
Yeah.
And I've seen this a lot with some children, pushed too early. They just get fed up because the kids are not an exhaustible resource. So I often say to a parent, look, 24 miles is your child leaving university, possibly with a degree, or in full-time employment in a career of their choice. That's when they're getting over that finish line. That's ultimately what we want. We want productive, happy, we want well-rounded individuals who are able to compete in society, who are able to fulfill the jobs that the job market needs, but also to have those soft skills, those life skills. So I'm at stage, 12 miles to 18 miles probably.
Yeah.
A levels is kind of 18 miles to 22 miles, and then your last couple of miles is your degree, etc.
Yeah.
So where is the most important part of that? It's a good start, isn't it? So when I'm at secondary, I'm often saying to myself, what actually can I do with the child who comes to me? How much can I get more out of that child? And that's when the switch happened about 7 or 8 years ago about value added. I thought, well, value added is actually a better measurement, isn't it?
Definitely.
But that impinges upon the fact of how we're measuring the children.
Yeah.
By what competencies? And you're back to your SATs and your CATs and your gaming. And I have so many conversations with a colleague when I look at a child's data. I think, that child's a level 7. And then you realise, yes, because the primary school that they went to practically sat and did their SATs with them.
Yeah.
So hold on a second. I am now responsible for a child's grades, and somebody cynical will come say to me, you are not a good teacher. That child didn't make progress in your classroom. And I'm going, that child made progress because I'm making genuine progress. That's fake progress because the grades aren't accurate. It comes back to the whole reporting system, the league tables, comes back to somewhere along the line, somebody is responsible for a child not doing well. And you think, well, actually, does somebody have to be responsible? At what stage is the child responsible? And I often say to children I teach, I didn't get where I am here because of my teachers. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I got here in spite of some of them. And that's a horrible thing to say, but it was a different time and a different education system. It was basically sort yourself out. And if you weren't doing well, it wasn't help. You helped yourself.
In fact, there was that saying sometimes, wasn't there, from adults to you, come on, you need to sort yourself out.
Do yourself.
You need to sort yourself out.
And what's going on? We're both parents. And sometimes I have my own children coming to me like, Daddy, help me. And I go, no.
Yeah.
And it's a horrible thing to refuse your child help. But I'm thinking, what am I doing here? I'm not enabling that child. I'm making them dependent.
Yeah.
And I think we're fostering a dependency culture. And I'm not, economically speaking, this sounds like some laissez-faire kind of libertarian sort of agenda. And I do see a value in that. And with the resignation of the social mobility czar, I know she's very big into this type of stuff, and I happen to agree to a certain extent with it. We sometimes have to remove the training wheels. We sometimes have to say to a child, there's the deep end of the swimming pool, there's the armbands off, and I'm chucking you in, and you know what? You might gulp a couple of mouthfuls of water, but you're going to learn to swim. Call me old-fashioned sometimes. I think sometimes we just need to chuck the kids in. But here's the thing. You have to know the level of challenge. If you chuck them in, it's too difficult. A lot of our children now switch off and they shut down. And that's one of the problems I have with a difficult academic subject like mine in history. They find my subject more challenging than most. And what I've had sometimes is kids going, I can't do it. And I'm thinking to myself, right, if I chunk this down and make this easier for you, okay, I'll get you over the line. But then I run the risk of doing what? Feeding into this culture of, I'm sorry, it's too difficult. Here you go. Here's an easier worksheet. And I think differentiation is important. Well, it's not differentiation any longer. It's enabled learning. But at the same time, if you get that wrong, you create a culture of can't do it.
I'll wait till someone does it for me.
Exactly. And I'm looking at a generation of children who are social media gurus, who can navigate their way through the cyber sphere like absolute experts, who will game to 2 o'clock in the morning. And I often say to them, who's taught you FIFA? Who's taught you Call of Duty? Who's taught you how to do TikTok videos? Could you tell me if any of your parents have taught you that? And they look at me and go, no. How did you do that? You taught yourself. I've got kids who say, I can't do maths lessons, but yet they can work out the mental transfers of how many transfers they've got, how much fake currency they have to buy the next reward in their computer game. And you're like, when it suits you, you're intelligent more than I am.
So they're more motivated when they're more interested. That's basically
there's something in it for them.
Okay, so is that our job then? To A, make it interesting, and B, is it possible, or should we be making it interesting.
Oh, well, it comes back to my little thing before Christmas holidays. Like, should I make my lessons fun? And the Russell Crowe, am I not entertaining? Am I not here to entertain you? And you often find that kids go, what makes a good teacher? They're funny. Yeah. I mean, there's a school that's actually banned. Get this one. It's another one of little tidbits of thing. They ban sarcasm as in any way, shape, or form in the classroom. And yet some parents were like, whoa, the teachers I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, the sarcastic. I know, it's funny, my kids said that to me. They said, we like that guy, he's quite sarcastic. Now I don't know if that's because they've been brought up in it. We do have a caller in. Okay, if you'd like to call back, we're more than happy to kind of have you on the show. It'd be great. Then we can actually see how those buttons work. We can actually see how things work. It is live. We are live, and we'd like to hear for you. Otherwise, we're going to just rabbit and rant on. So we both picked up when we did our masters.
Yes,
John Hattie.
Hattie is 2009 God, isn't it?
Yeah, 2009 God. So we did our masters 2013, 14ish, was it? So around that. So it's fairly kind of fresh stuff at the time. So it kind of, and I know it kind of it stuck with me. Luckily for me, it kind of came up recently. One of our SLTs kind of brought it up. So I kind of thought, there's a guy that's actually on my wavelength for once, which is good. So what should or what could teachers do you think? What should we be doing? And then we can maybe look at what pupils should be doing.
I mean, it's the little things in our control. That how you speak to the children is important. It's about the standards. It's about the values that you have. I think it's values, personality. And I know people don't like the personality thing, but it is about that sense of I am in this because I want to be here. I mean, it does drive me crazy sometimes when you get people going, I have to be here today. Anything. Yeah. I look at the children and I go, do you want to be here? And if they look at me and go, no, well, what am I doing? And imagine the member of staff standing in front of you going like, I'm 2 years off retirement. Yeah. Sorry, but if you're there, you are there. You've got to be. That's something that's in your control. Teacher credibility has to be important. You've got to know what you're doing.
So is that the children getting a feeding off that? Do you think?
But they have to buy into who you are. They have to buy in a little bit of who you are.
So if you're going into the room of because this is not. I mean, we're not talking off days here, are we?
No.
We're sometimes we're all tired. Sometimes we've not slept. We've got our own kids that have kept us up late. There's all sorts of other issues. We've over caffeinated. We decided to have that third piece of Toblerone just before bed, and then worked out.
Well, the candy canes.
We were trying to have some candy canes at the minute. So sometimes the brain just doesn't switch off, and you wake up next morning and go, I just can't seem to function. That's different, isn't it? Because students still know that you're a caring teacher that's tired. Whereas if you are just an uncaring teacher and you're just doing it for the numbers, the pay, I mean, I still find it incredible that how hard this job is that some people try and do it for a pay packet, pension packet, holidays, or whatever. I can't see that working long term.
I think those days are gone in a way. Yeah. Maybe that's the thing. You're left with the hardcore individuals who are there for the right reasons, or maybe others have been destroyed. I think, unfortunately, too many good teachers have been hounded out of the profession because of all the changes. But the thing about it is, here's the thing. Good teachers should be passionate about what they learn and passionate about their subject. The problem is we've got teachers not teaching their subject. But here's the thing. A good teacher should be able to adapt and evolve. You can't do the thing you were doing 20 years ago and say, because that's like driving. You can't say driving is updating. You have to keep updating. You have to constantly learn and evolve.
Is that different from, because you're in this position this year, of taking on completely different subjects out of your...
You find a way to communicate it. I mean, the kids walk in and one kid goes, look, sir, you're not a physics teacher. I went, no, I'm not a physics teacher. But I've always taught them history. And I go, do you not know I'm a history teacher? I'm a geography qualified teacher who's now the head of history. I've taught citizenship, PhD. For me, it's the subject's important, but it's also the buy-in. You, the teacher, has to buy into the subject you're teaching, regardless of whatever the subject that is. You've got to believe in what you're teaching them. If you don't believe in what you're teaching them, like the footballing philosophy, you've got to turn and say to a bunch of young lads, this is my footballing philosophy. This is how we're going to play the game. They have to buy into that. Otherwise, they're going to be fighting and resisting against you. Yeah. So you have to have something about you, that kind of that passionate way that you are. And you know yourself, my art teacher was my favourite teacher because the man lived and breathed what he did. You've got to forge strong relationships with the students. And that one's difficult sometimes, especially when they can be quite challenging, especially the last couple of months. But it is sometimes about being firm and fair. That's the old thing. It's not about giving them everything you want. It's learning the word no. I care about you because I'm actually forcing you to do this.
Yeah.
This is for your own good. It's like that. I often use the analogy of a doctor. Imagine I said to the children, I'm a doctor, right? You go to a doctor to be cured, right? You are a student, I'm your teacher. You're here to learn from me and I'm here to teach you, right? In the same reality, you go to a doctor to be cured of an illness. Imagine you give the medicine to a patient and a patient goes, don't want your medicine, not having it. You'd be like, what ridiculous, what are you doing? This is for your own benefit. So you have to communicate to the kids and say, I'm sorry you don't like this learning sometimes, but this is what we're doing. And it's about communicating why we're doing it, the rationale. You've got to say to the kids, this is why we're studying this. And I think autonomy is important in that because you have to have some control over what you're teaching. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of teachers are being shackled, aren't they?
Yeah, but I still think, I mean, you said it's a big ask. I still think it's a big ask. I appreciate what you're saying. And I know that you and a lot of other colleagues try their very, very hardest. But it's hard. Like if I was asked to do physics, geography, another subject, although I would do my best and I would do all things that you talk about, my passion, my reading, the stuff that I'm doing away from the classroom is all business studies related.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's not going to be at the standard. But that's good
management. Again, the good management will put the square peg in a square hole, the round peg in a round hole. Good management would evaluate their staff members and say, that staff member's competencies and skills, that's where it's meant to be. But how many times you've got non-specialists there who, as you say, they're told, some fall into it and enjoy it and embrace it. Some fall into it and then obviously it's the thing they have to do now because they're typecast. Their career's gone into kind of cul-de-sac. And they're now kind of like this, well, I'm a teacher of this now. I started as a teacher of that. Some embrace that journey within education and evolve as educators and go on a kind of magical mystery tour and end up doing multiple different things. And the same as some go into senior management, some come down from senior management.
But I was set in this position where I taught business studies, went down the ICT route, which I was very happy with, very comfortable with, linked to some of my other passions like we're doing now with the IT and media here. More than happy with that. And then that course went almost towards computer science. And that's where the problem started. Because although I was all those things, I was passionate, I went away and did the hard work, the hard research, tried to build up my skill knowledge, to push and challenge the higher achievers, I was letting those people down. Because I just didn't have that kind of background that I could just do it.
Well, the funny
thing and eventually it did come through. Yes, professional development's key. I understand that, but still, there was something, either the way kind of my brain process information or whatever, but there was just some kind of neurological difference that meant that I just couldn't push the higher achievers over, and that was me kind of stretched to my kind of maximum. And I was worried, as we said before, that if I carried on with this, I would always have that what's it called now when you kind of you don't think you're as good as you should be. Imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Yeah. So I always felt like I had imposter syndrome with computer science because ultimately I knew deep down that I'd only known this a couple of weeks before the students did. Whereas if it came to something like business studies, I'm quite happy to sit there in the classroom and I can go, all right, what you're really talking about is this, and that's way off on a different spec somewhere else. But I can give that knowledge over and say, don't worry about that. Actually, we did market mapping this week in business studies. So I can very quickly go back, and some of the students were struggling, saying, well, hang on a minute, some of this is a bit subjective, isn't it? I went, absolutely. And because I had that bank of knowledge from my studies, from my reading, is actually I can go back and say, well, actually, you're right. And a lot of the times it is called a perception map. So therefore the perception is the subjectivity. The subjectivity then brings in those students who are struggling to learn this particular model. So I think sometimes we've got to be careful that although we're saying to teachers, do all these things, and Hattie's got these things in, it still needs to come from a level of competence at the start and a comfortability with what you're doing. That's not just throw you in, like it's like painted by numbers. Hang on a minute, if I get this guy
That
in,
means
and
the
then I'll
school,
do X, Y, and Z.
Your school, your head teacher, your SLT, your head of department, all has responsibilities then to make sure they have the right people, right resources. That's the things outside the teacher control.
Yeah.
The timetabling, the way the classrooms run, the behaviour management of the school, the systems that run behind the school, the attendance policy of the school. All of those things impact upon your classroom culture and your classroom climate. And you often find that you could have, I've always had this, I've always had my way of doing things. And I'm sorry, I am not for budging on some things. But then again, Hattie backs me up on that.
Yeah.
Because Hattie is basically saying, the sage on the stage. For years I was told, oh, you're preaching too much, oh, you're standing in front of the classroom. Kids have always went, sir, we enjoy that.
Yeah.
Sir, we buy into that. Because what do they get? They enjoy it, they ask me questions. But then it's always been criticised by teachers who are a bit more slide on the side. And slide on the side is actually, according to Hattie, is less effective. But here's our problem now. With a curriculum jammed full of knowledge and content, I have less time to be a sage on the stage. And it's more, you learn this. And literally, I think, unfortunately, the way our exam system's set up now, it's actually contradictory to a lot of things Hattie's saying.
Yeah.
Because the things that I'm outside my control, the attendance of the people, we know attendance makes a huge play. I have no control over attendance policy. I have no control over whether a child comes to school or not. All I can do is what I'm physically got in front of those children and be that all those things Hattie's saying.
Well, we had this debate literally this week where we just couldn't understand why a group of students were just a little bit late. And actually, we did a student voice. We organised a student voice when they came back, and actually, it turned out to be the local transport network for the students to get into school. They were literally saying to us in the end, we'd love to come to school on time. We'd love to do this. We want to come to this lesson. However, we just can't get a bus. And actually then, we'd never actually thought about that.
No.
We never actually thought that actually the student
There's an external constraint.
The student is at the bus stop at 7:45, 3/4 an hour early for a 15-minute, 20-minute bus ride. So that's well within reason, I think. And each bus just drives past them full until about 8:30.
But then this comes into play then. We saw this during the pandemic, the children with the digital divide.
Yeah.
There are some children who were turned around, and here comes the thing now. And this is the kicker. Who was responsible ultimately for the success or the failure of the child? Is it the school, the parents, the socioeconomic status of the area they live in, the primary school, the teacher?
Yeah.
But when it ultimately comes down to it, we are the ones in the firing line.
Yeah.
That's the key point I'm making here, is that all these external constraints, you could be the most enthusiastic, you could do everything right, you could be the best teacher in the world ever.
Yeah.
You could be the best football manager in the world ever. But if you don't have the funding, the resources, the buildings, the setup, the external constraints, the attendance policy, the SLT support, all those things working with you, you could be pulling one direction, but all these other things could be pulling against you. Somebody will walk up to me and say, why have those kids not achieved? And you're going, because those kids have not achieved.
So what is
the answer to that? I have to have the answer. Why do I have the answer that these children not achieve?
Yeah.
That's got to be on a whole collective group of people, isn't it?
But who can feed that back to the wider community then? Should it be the governors? Should it be the SLT? Should it be the head teacher himself or the CEO of a trust? I mean, where does the pressure come from to say? Because I didn't really hear it. I mean, maybe it does happen. We just don't know, do we? I don't hear a lot in the media of a head teacher saying, we've got an issue with public transport, or we've got an issue with health, or we've got an issue with.
I wouldn't be for a head teacher for all the money in the world, because they have all those external constraints to deal with, and how frustrating it must be when they've got budgeting constraints, staffing constraints. They have the advice coming from government to the 2nd of January as they go back to school. And I just read one of my news articles.
Well, to be fair, I think what's happening with head teachers now is they're not waiting for the government or the department to make any because they can't, can they? They can't be, because there's been no proper guidance for such a long time.
News story this week: head teachers are breaking down in tears, suffering migraines, and even passing out, with 6 in 10 admitting they've considered changing jobs in the past year because of increased levels of stress. The National Association of Head Teachers Union says school leaders are before considering leaving the profession. Fewer and fewer middle leaders are aspiring to take on the job because they see how punishing it is. Paul Whitman, NAHT General Secretary, told the Observer newspaper The anger is even despair is heading into our members right now and unprecedented. School leaders are telling me they cannot continue to run their schools in the current circumstances. The annual survey of well-being of school staff in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland by the charity Education Support found stress had reached epidemic proportion among the heads, with 87% of senior leaders saying they'd experienced poor mental health as a result of their work, and 58% saying they've actively sought to change the jobs. Now, there sometimes a good head teacher is screening the staff members from the phone calls, from the challenging parents. And this, you have to open any local newspaper, this school's haircut policy, this school's policy on this school's policy on that. We are literally getting absolutely rounded on.
Yeah.
All you got to do is, for clickbait, is go to the local press and say, my child's not getting the education. This school has failed my child. You're like, whoa. This school has failed your child.
Yeah.
And I'm at the point sometimes where I go on, I do it. I'm sorry, I do. I go on and go, sorry, but hold on a second. You are accusing the school of failing your child. At what stage is that your child? At what stage did you read that child a book, a bedtime story, take it to a museum? At what stage did you take responsibility for your child's learning? At what stage did you then say, oh, my child goes to school? Yeah. And that's what we saw during the pandemic as well, where people realised, didn't they? They realised, oh my word, look at the primary school stuff. Yeah. Wow, look how hard these primary school teachers work to the bone. Here's the work your children are doing. And all of a sudden parents are like, what? This is what our kids are doing at school? Yeah. Yes!
Yeah, but to play devil's advocate again, there are a lot of parents that just don't know how to do a lot of those things. We live in a bubble of, we're doing it for our kids. True. We understand the importance of that.
True.
But if you are, if you struggle with literacy issues yourself, or you've got mental health issues yourself, or you've got 2 jobs, 6 jobs, 7 jobs, whatever, and you struggle to put, and remember in the area that I used to work with you in, there was the children were going home to aunties, uncles' houses, and just getting a good night's sleep.
But that's the externals again, isn't it?
So it's an external. It's this externality of but they've been brought up in the X Factor, Simon Cowell kind of judging social stage. And they feel like we do with the football managers. Everyone thinks, I can go to the Derby County match, and I can shout for the manager to go, even though they don't really know anything about kind of football tactics. But
you got to blame somebody.
God, it feels good, doesn't it?
you got to pin it on somebody. You got to blame the teacher.
It feels good for an afternoon, doesn't it?
But equally, a child comes out and says, "Why did you not do well in the exam? You didn't give me revision.
Yeah.
You didn't do this for me. You didn't do that for me." And you're physically going, what more do you want me to do? Do you want me to walk into that exam hall and do the exam for you?
Well, I think that some teachers then try and kind of do it by numbers, don't they? And try and be kind of really obvious. Because I know I've done this with parents.
I think there are some unhappy teachers out there who are shackled in the system now because they need to do things to get those children over the line. That's the point what I'm making. It's a general point. They're doing what they need to do to survive in education, and what they're doing to survive in education is getting those exam results, regardless of the mental health implications for themselves, regardless of the mental health implications for the children. And I think that's what education started to become. It's become the exam factory of the children are a product, they're a data, and you must get these kids like you are. If you're a Premier League football manager, you must get your team to the top of the league. And if you don't, ultimately speaking, you're sacked for it. And that's what's boiling down to. It's not the collective group of people, the parent, the child, the community, the external things. It's literally, what are you doing in the classroom that makes such a difference? And that doesn't fly with the action research done in schools about what impact we have.
Yeah, but it's interesting because one of the interesting things, because the school that we've mentioned a couple of times on this podcast, that kind of Ofsted won high results, didn't do so well in the recent Ofsted report because of their lack of support around social issues, around racism, well-being, and
they haven't updated themselves in 14 years.
However, it does that not kind of show a positive push from Ofsted to move away from it? Because this is a school on paper that flies through everything. If your child, on data-wise, if you can plonk your child in there and step back,
it's like
your child gets a good result.
You have to have the balance.
Yeah.
You want your children to do well. You want them to get their exam results. but you don't want them to be broken to get those exam results. And I'm seeing far too often the staff member, the child, is broken in a system that's not fit for purpose. So that leads us nicely, and we'll conclude on that. And I think things have gone a bit too far. It is balance. The child must accept some responsibility for their own performance. The staff member, the teacher, and the things within their control, they have to accept some responsibility for their own professional development, for the passion for the subject, for the planning, the organisation, and how they run their classroom. Absolutely. Senior member staffs have to take responsibility for making sure they put the right people in the right place to teach the right subject and the timetable. So I think it's a collective responsibility, and that's what it has to and always should be. You've got to support your head teacher's got to support you. You have to work together, collaborate, because those relationships have to be not just with the staff, they have to be staff to student to parent. You have to be honest with parents sometimes, and I have been honest with parents sometimes. I'm sorry, there's not more I can do for your child. I've even had children say to me once, sir, I let you down, I did bad in the exam, that's not on you, it's on me. The first thing I look at the child and goes, you're a child. And I use the analogy, I failed my driving test, doesn't make me a bad driver. You've had a bad day, don't worry about it. When you're older, and I've had kids contact me years later and say, you know, I didn't do well at my GCSEs. And then you see them, and they've recovered, they've done brilliant at their A levels, and they're off doing brilliant degrees. I've seen some children recover, and that resilience of they learn through failure. The problem is, we're not allowed any longer to fail. Therefore, how can you learn from failure if failure is a bad thing? Failure can be a good thing. If properly managed. I failed my 11 plus and here I am. Because it made me stronger. And others, it all depends on the rescue. We call them, in psychology, they call them rescuing factors. In my case, it was my parents. In some people's case, it might be the teacher. In some people's case, it might be the school. You've got to have some rescuing factors around. And yes, I pity those children who haven't got those rescuing factors, who have got nothing in their corner. And school should be one of the rescuing factors. The problem is, you get to the best school in the country, the best teachers in the country, but if the child's heart isn't in it and they're not going to perform, you can't literally physically force them to do work, can you? It's not Victorian bricklaying, is it?
Well, no, you can't do that. I mean, it's interesting that one of the points you made there when you were talking about kind of, I failed my 11 plus, but this is where I am now. I mean, do children respect us? Do they look at us and do they respect, like when we make these comments, do they go, I don't really want to be you? I mean, there's the great, what's the comedian that was maths teacher? He does the Nation program. Ramesh.
Oh yes.
Yeah, Ramesh. Is it Ranganathan? Is that the Ranganation?
It's very clever.
Yeah, I mean, he often makes a comment on one of his stand-ups of, I'm doing that big rousing speech to get students motivated, but I'm the one driving down the road with a kind of second-hand car with the doors falling off. And do they have any respect for us as individuals? And
in my 18 years, I had it once with a child who says, "You're a very talented individual, Mr. Poland. You could do anything. You've got brilliant vocal skills and everything else." He says, "You've really underachieved." And I looked at this kid and I went, I looked at him and said, "I have 2 children. I have a nice house. I am happy with my life. I have a job I enjoy, and I'm intrinsically motivated." And I looked at him and says, "Do you see me come to work with a smile on my face? If I found a job I'm good at and I enjoy doing?" And he looked at me and says, "Yeah, would you say I'm a good teacher?" He says, "Yeah, you're a good teacher." He says, "Will you remember me in 10 years' time?" "Yeah, I will remember me." "Will you remember some of the things I've taught you?" "Maybe." I said, "So then, do you think I've underachieved then?" And I get this. I seen this kid a couple of years later, and he apologized. He says, "Did you remember what you said to me?" He says, "But you're still in the same school." He goes, "Still in the same school, doing the same thing." He says, "How are you doing with yourself?" He says, "Yeah, I'm doing all right. I've got my own business and everything else." I said, "Oh, you're achieving." I says, "How'd you get your exam grades?" He says, "Well, my exam grades were actually, this kid was on paper was an underachieving kid, but he had that moxie." And the thing is, I could have responded with that moxie, like, "Who do you think you are?" and shut him down. But then realizing that, all right, he needs guidance. He needs me to go like, "All right, you arrogant little," you know what I mean? You're not having to go at me like, I'm not, because he's got, "You're just a teacher." And I went, "I'm just a teacher." Really? You think that's something important? I says, "Do you not know I chose to do this job?"
It's interesting.
And that's when I flipped it and says, I could choose to do all the jobs. I choose here. I choose this school. I choose my subject. I choose to do this. And I think it's important to actually make that point sometimes. That if you had the choice to do this, would you do this? And I mean, I see those polls sometimes, and somebody tries and says, like, if you could go back and tell yourself to go into teaching, would you go into teaching again? Would I do the same thing? I would choose the same school, and I would choose to do what I've done, because I am proud of the achievements of my teaching career. And I think it's important to say that to the kids. And it's not about the exam results. I'm proud when I see them go to Cambridge and Oxford from working class backgrounds. I'm proud when I've seen some of the children. I've got kids who are now down in London as working for the Daily Telegraph. Who, I've got kids who have had learning difficulties turn around and achieve beyond their supposed envelope. That's the key to it. It's when you turn around and say that, what's the potential of that child? And I think that's what we're losing a lot now, is we're losing that potential because we have a system with shackles and shackles and shackles. And then we're also losing the potential of some teachers because they're also being curtailed. And then they're blamed for things outside their control and they say, I'm out of this. So I wonder how many of my colleagues and many of our former colleagues are sitting there saying to themselves, that was me. I was hounded out of teaching because my exam results weren't great. And those exam results weren't my exam results.
But do they leave teaching because of the guilt? Because of the pressures put on them, because of the responsibilities.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't think they're good enough.
So because the pressure's been put so much on from the students, from the parents, from the externalities, that actually you end to think, actually, some teachers then turn around and think, actually, this is all my fault that this child...
They feel guilty, they feel they're not good enough, they're not adequate enough. As you say, imposter syndrome, where they turn around and they soul search and says, I'm responsible for that. They fall up on their sword. Some nobly turn around and say, I got that wrong, I taught the wrong stuff, I got that wrong, that class was difficult. But there's the other side of it, when you get your senior management being judgy, going like, why have your children not achieved? And like, my children not achieved. I didn't realise I was rearing 30 children. They're not my children. They're somebody else's children. I just borrow them for a couple of... I borrow them for a couple of hours a week. I borrow these kids for a couple of hours a week, and you're holding me responsible for what they do. I wasn't the one out at the weekend getting absolutely completely blattered when they should have been doing their exam revision. I've given them all the exam revision in the world. I put it on a plate, and they didn't take it. What more do you want me to do? And that's where you feel sometimes where you're like, what do you want me to do for these children? What more do you want from me?
What do you want from me?
Because the focus is always on, what's the teacher doing? What's the school doing? What's the teacher doing? And that brings us into this age of responsibility, because that's one of our news stories that caught my attention this week, which was this idea of holding a child accountable, criminal responsibility. And the age is 10.
That's crazy.
In England. Scotland have it at 12.
And we were both shocked by that, weren't we? We thought it was older.
I thought it was 16 or 18.
Yeah, I thought it was 14 plus, to be honest with you. Which I still thought would be low. But when you said it's 10, I mean, that seems...
And the case is close to us. It was Rihanna Rudd, and we know the area. And she was a 14-year-old. Well, she wasn't the first, but there was a 14-year-old boy.
We'll give a warning that some of this might be sensitive.
Pretty much. Yeah. But it's not the first. There was a 14-year-old schoolboy from Darlington, was the youngest person in the UK to be convicted of terror charges. So 14-year-old. And that was last year, January last year. The boy cannot be named because of his age, but he pleaded guilty to offences contrary to Section 58 of the Terrorism Act of the year 2000. He admitted possession of record information likely to be used by a person committing an act of terrorism. Police said the charges related to extreme right-wing terrorism. The boy was arrested in July last year when he was 13 as part of a pre-planned intelligence-led operation from counter-terrorism. I looked at the data on counter-terrorism. It has exploded. We have an increase now during the pandemic, with the kids were online, of online grooming, online targeting, and online radicalization, and of school children. The interesting story coming from that is the young girl, Rihanna Rudd, and she originally was being convicted of terrorism charges, but then they changed their mind when they looked into the background of what happened to her, realized that she'd become radicalized, and then she had, unfortunately, taken her own life. But they reclassified her as being a victim, as opposed to at the beginning, this person is going to be convicted of terrorism charges as a child. Now, from a personal experience, and I don't mind saying this, I grew up surrounded by political violence. I grew up in a hotbed of the Troubles on the border in an area that was frequented by terrorist organizations. I knew in my local community who I could have a conversation with and who I didn't. Did I see young people being radicalized? Yeah, of course it did. It was the middle of a conflict situation. Would I say that young people in places like Afghanistan and Ukraine and Syria have similarly been, there are 100,000 child soldiers in parts of Africa? Unfortunately, children have Pol Pot. I mean, historians know this. Children were recruited by the Nazis. Hitler made a claim about that. Your children are mine now. He indoctrinated the young. He even purposely knew, get him young, get him early, and you don't have to fight them in the road.
Yeah.
He made a beeline for the youth because he knew that youth would always rebel. So he tried to turn youth to his own advantage. We know that Pol Pot did that in Vietnam Cambodia, where he turned young people into killers. Kone did that in 2010 with the child soldiers in parts of Congo, and we saw Chairman Mao do that. But then what's the problem with that? Are children responsible for their actions? At what age do we say that a child is still a child? And at what age? And it comes back to this idea of link the two together. What stage does a child become sentient, responsible? Or do we factor in, again, neurodivergence? Do we factor in the social background? Do we factor in, my gosh, that child's had a terrible upbringing? Do we look at the bigger picture?
Yeah.
Because for me, a child is not born evil. They're created in the environment, in that hotbed of where they are. And therefore, if you're blaming a child for being a victim, therefore you're punishing that child for something outside its control. It's that idea again of what stage can you say that child is responsible, and what stage is society responsible, the parents responsible, the system responsible, the social care system responsible, the school responsible.
Well, I think kind of linked to what we're talking about today is that the child itself is one of, it's literally the Christmas puzzle that you get, isn't it? There are so many interlinked pieces. I think what we're saying now is that the too much of the pieces become a teacher.
Yes.
And actually, where the teacher exists is within a very complicated web of social external factors that some they can have contact with, some things they're not in contact with. I mean, we haven't even mentioned, for example, hormonal changes and all that goes on whilst during
the adolescent brain of 14 getting rewired. They seek out danger. They actively seek out danger. Of course they seek out danger. What was I like at 14 years old? I was absolutely mad as a box of frogs. Impulse. Talk about impulsivity. They are. But then again, do you turn around and say, oh, they're just a teenager, they're going to behave. And that's the problem sometimes of you have to have consequences. You have to have consequences. There has to be boundaries, there has to be consequences, we have to teach them.
But you also have to, as you get more experience, you get to realise, for example, we've had this conversation at home where at the minute there's the head banging in our house between my wife and my older daughter. And I'm saying to my wife, actually, you don't need to kind of comment on that because it's just a blah. It's just a moment for her, and she's probably forgotten it. And you're now kind of you're analysing it and thinking there's something needs to be done, but actually it's gone for her. It's just a hormonal moment of
But we know this as teachers.
We know.
We get battered sometimes.
You can't get challenged you can't challenge everyone for just like that sarky comment or that moment of my daughter's very good at the minute, rolling her eyes, and I don't know how many girls have done that to you in year 8 and year 9 of the eye roll. Fabulous at it, aren't they?
My children mentally batter me sometimes, and I mean, sorry, it's just a terrible choice of words, but they basically they come at you. You're the worst. You're the worst. This, that. I hate you, and you're like, what? I've just done everything for you. What more? And again, it's back to this thing. Sometimes being a teacher and being a parent, the parallels are absolutely striking. The patience that you need, the tolerance level you need, the compassion that you need. It's very difficult to sometimes do both, because there was times when you go, I'm sorry, but you have to learn, and I don't want to punish you, but I'm going to have to punish you because this is the way the world is. I'm sorry, I'm not going to turn to a police officer and say, sorry, police officer, I wasn't doing 37, here's the camera, turn the camera off. You have to have some rules, don't you?
Yeah, but there's a split sometimes in the school environment. Because there are those things that you do have to really challenge students on because of safety. There's some moments, as you just said, impulsiveness of a teenager can sometimes mean that a little bit of a kind of they see as a push and shove can all of a sudden be on the edge of a staircase and a kind of huge problem.
Which brings us nicely and neatly to online, and this is again one of our stories. So we're moving the thread in here, and we talk about misogyny and sexist incidents on the rise in schools due to the toxic social media influences, according to education staff and charities. True, seen an explosion of this before. A certain individual, we don't want to pluck for, had reached a critical mass of mainstream media. I'd heard about this individual in schools. I had the conversation with some young men.
We'd already had it actually before Christmas.
Exactly.
Literally just before Christmas.
Exactly. And you're going, right, how did this person reach that audience? Of course, they reach that audience because that's the world that our teenagers inhabit. And we are fighting the good fight. We're doing a thing. But this is the thing you always hear is like, oh, what are they teaching in the schools? And you're like, what are they teaching in schools? We have a curriculum that's overloaded. You want us to deal with misogynistic behaviour in schools? Fine. Release some subject matter, allow us the time, give us the funding, give us the training, give us a lot more resources that we need. You can't keep saying, oh, there's society's problem, what are they teaching in school? Every time there's a news story, it's like, what are they teaching in school? Let's teach this in school. Let's teach it. Every man and his dog wants us to teach everything from sign language to misogyny to, you think, where at point has school got enough resources, time, or inkling, or skill set to be teaching everything about online safety? And yes, we do. But then, what's PHSE? What is that? It's an afterthought.
Yeah, we get like 40 minutes, 50 minutes.
It's squeezed in, but and then you get. Were you taught sex education in school? Were you taught about this at school? You taught about school? Yes and no. It's not really given, I think, enough credence that it does. But then every person in society expects schools to be doing all this stuff.
So have we got to that point then where we have to make a decision at some point? If the resources aren't going to change and the complexities around children's lives are going to increase, that we do get to a point where we say a school is this. They are going to learn 9 subjects up until the age of 16, and that is it. I mean, is the scope of the role just too big now with the lack of funding, the lack of resources?
We're overloaded. The kids are overloaded. And therefore, the most important things that we need, health and safety, security. You take your Maslow hierarchy of needs again. Health, welfare, food, safety. You take the most basic things that children need to flourish. Schools need to provide those. A safe environment, a nurturing environment, a compassionate environment, a place where you make mistakes, a place where they can achieve. If you haven't got those basics right, then you can't do you can't do the higher order stuff if you don't do the lower order stuff.
Let's think of big picture then quickly. We've got big picture in 8 minutes, I know. But who would do that? Who would do the sex education, the online safety, the pastoral stuff? If we're just saying that school is, you come in for a geography lesson, you come for a business lesson, and my job is purely to get the best knowledge across.
And therein lies our judgment. Society judges us as teachers. What do they teach in the schools? We're judged on exam results, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right.
Parents judge us on exam results. And yet, here's where I sometimes have my issue. I'll turn around and say to my students, you've not signed your diary. Get your parent to sign that diary. I want that diary signed. And the child looks at me and goes, I want your parent to check your diary to do their job.
Yeah.
And the child looks at me and goes, I'm sorry, communicate that back to your parent, please.
Yeah.
I want them to do their job, because sure as night comes the day, they will hold me accountable at parents even go, why is my child not making progress in that subject? I'm going, but equally, when a parent sits down, parents even says, thank you very much, my child's doing really well. My first response is, no, thank you very much, because you have taught your child those things that you need as a parent. And it comes down to that. Whose responsibility is it? Is it our responsibility? Is it my responsibility to teach children about being a male role model? Is that my job and my responsibility to start and say, all right, boys, here's how to be a man?
Well, I don't think so, but I think that is the current expectation.
But where is the guidance on that? Where's the funding? Where's the training?
Yeah.
Where's somebody pulling me to one side and say, all right, Mr. Poland, I want you to teach about misogynistic behaviour. Yeah. What you get is, here's a slideshow and a PowerPoint, teach the PowerPoint. You know, whoa.
But likewise, who's helping parents to do that? I mean, this is the crux of the issue.
Who's educating the people who are educating the children?
Should we be? I mean, I've done the diary thing. I mean, fortunately, the school that I'm currently at doesn't do the kind of diary organiser, because it was such a bugbear of my life.
We brought it back in.
You brought it back in, okay. So maybe it's going to come back in, I don't know. But is anyone actually telling the parents? I mean, I often thought this, that we have these big conflicts with the child, and they're probably going home, and the parents are probably going. They're probably going to go, well, I haven't got time for this, and you know, and there's we're basically putting the child as like a middleman, in a conflict.
But that goes back to relationships. That comes back to responsibility. I will take responsibility for the things I believe I'm responsible for. The parent has to take responsibility for the things they're responsible for. The school has to take responsibility for the things they're responsible for. Society, the government, and the problem is, as you said earlier on, is we're in a blame culture of what are they teaching? Oh, it's disgraceful. They don't get taught this at school. They don't get taught that at school. And you're like, what do you want me to do? Say, sorry, I'm judged on this criteria, but you want me to change what I'm doing. And don't get me wrong. I think this is extremely important. I believe this is more important than a lot of what I'm teaching. It is very important that we teach these young men to and I think that is society is saying what the schools wants to do.
Yeah.
And government is trying, because here's an interesting one. But again, I had to dig this story out, and it's interesting that this story was well buried somewhere in the media, and it was was actually coming from the ex Home Office Minister, who turn around and they want something put into the online safety bill to stop this misogynistic stuff in school. But again, that was well down the list of things, and it was actually it was Priti Patel, and Priti Patel urged that we need online safety, and that, like I said, I'm quite pleased to see that, because for me that is something that is very important. Oh, I've lost where it is, but it was a bill for 30 MPs in order to try and regulate what I think is, it's there. We'll try and regulate, which is the wide open area of the world, which is the World Wide Web. But again, we have to, as teachers, have to be one step ahead of these children. We're not. We're playing catch up. They know. And again, it's emboldened in us teachers to be always constantly evolving, constantly learning. Let's go back to what we were saying earlier about Hattie. Part of our job is to keep up to date. Part of our job is to keep fresh. Part of our job is to meet the needs of society. But what are we judged on?
I know, it's the
exam results.
That's because it's a business model, isn't it? And the exam results is the bottom line.
Yeah.
Well, that was always going to be a challenging one, Brent, to try and cover that today. I just want you to put your headphones on for a second, Brent, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I've got a bit of a surprise for you today, because this is happening.
Yeah.
Somebody's birthday tomorrow. First day back at school, and it's your birthday, I believe. How do you feel about that, going back into school? And
I always bring, it's always Christmas and birthday was always combined for me, but I always bring fruit in. It's always our convention to bring cakes or biscuits into our staff room. But my birthday being so close to Christmas and everybody doing the detox, I always go to the shop and buy about £15 worth of fresh fruit, and it always gets charging from half the staff members with them going like, where's the cakes and biscuits and everything else, and then the other half are going like, thank you, because we just started my diet. So it's my thing for the last 18 years. I always bring fruit into school. Yes, another year older.
Happy birthday.
I'm not going to say what age I am. I'm starting to feel it a little bit longer now, but there we go. Last one I want to have a little chat about. Elon Musk. Here's an interesting one. Elon Musk. So Elon Musk claimed the artificial intelligence program ChatGPT basically can revolutionize education, and as AI, he reckons could do away with homework. However, New York Education Board says it wants it banned. And we're talking about teachers over here talking about the dangers of plagiarism and AI into the classroom. So on the one hand, again, you've got Elon Musk saying, I can revolutionize education, I can change how we learn, how you're taught and everything else. And then on the other hand, you have people going, we need to ban this because this is plagiarism, this is cheating. And again, the right hand and left hand don't actually have what's going on. Again, we are in that world where we're trying to the pace of things is so fast sometimes. I think the modern teacher now is having to be burnt out a lot quicker than they used to, because we just have to keep going. We have to keep updating. And I think at that stage, everybody's requiring everything off us yesterday. And I just I can return to basics sometimes.
I mean, homework is such a controversial subject, I think, because I think there's times where I've had this parents' evening this week that obviously I've set homework, but what I've decided to do, certainly for my immediate class, is set homework that's a real stretch, get them to enter competitions. They're doing photography at the minute, so there's a couple of kind of Christmas and New Year.
You keep sending me their history homework.
But I certainly look at my daughter. We had this conversation the other day, and obviously we've had maths on the Minds Day, but my daughters do a lot of the My Math stuff at the minute. And, I understand why teachers are setting my maths, but sometimes it's different the way it's been taught in class and that type of thing. So there's a real danger of homework that sometimes it's homework by numbers, and it's teachers and staff going, well, I've set homework today.
Yeah.
And I think I've sent you a couple of geography homeworks from my daughter where I've gone, and my daughter's like, this isn't even the topic that we're doing at the minute. So it can, it's
doing something.
You've got to be really careful with homework. But just on my phone, as kind of as we just talked about the Elon Musk thing about how do we create independence, how do we create responsibility. Well, it's certainly not helped. Is we've just had a kind of an update about our local library, potentially that the council will be closing it in March. And that then is a real kick in the teeth for teachers that, we want responsibility, we want learners, but where is it that they're learning? Where do they go? I mean, I used to go to the library. Currently, I work in the centre of Birmingham, and I know that my students go and use the Central Library, which is a fantastic architectural building, but also great space for learning. These places were the places where people went to learn. If you're a small rural community,
I'm going to back you up.
Yeah.
In my community, the library was where I went, and I only lived about 7 minutes away from the library. I didn't have a desk. I shared a bedroom with my brothers. But when I went to study at the library. Now, don't get me wrong, by the time I got to my A-levels, there was other reasons for going to the library. There was, I'm not going to deny to you that the library was a place to, for instance, have chats with people of...
increase your social skills.
Increase my soft skills and my social skills, and a place to meet. But I did go to the library for the primary function that it had the books, it had the place of learning, but also the fact that I knew if I went to a library, I shackled myself. It was a weird thing to do. And you go into the library, I had to force myself to study. But I couldn't, if I stayed at home, I'd find 50 distractions. A bit like the people who work from home. Yeah. You have to think of a certain mindset to be able to work from home. I couldn't work from home because I had 50 distractions. I'm terrible at it. I'd find 50 ways to avoid doing work. Other people, more self-disciplined, more set up that way, can. The library always was a place where I could go. And closing libraries, again, I think is another one of those externals that it deprives communities, especially people who don't have that social mobility, those cultural capital. So, but that's again what we're up against. We're up against a world which is educating the children without us. And we're at that point now. I think I'm at that point now where sometimes I'm re-educating the children on what the world is not what it is. In other words, they're getting such false information and misinformation. Part of my job is not to educate them. It's kind of to uneducate and re-educate. And that sounds like somebody's going to come up and accuse me of indoctrinating kids. But they are coming now with preconceptions and information overload, which then leads me to spending my time dealing with the conversations about the likes of, that individual who I will not name, who's got a platform, who's dealing in misogynistic behavior. But then where's that in my scheme of work? When somebody around says to me, oh, you're behind in your scheme of work. I'm like, that's because I spent a half an hour dealing with that.
Yeah.
And therein lies the crux of the matter. I see it still as my job to spend a half an hour stopping my lesson and having the conversation of misogynistic behaviour. And it did come up. But I wonder how when somebody looks at my books and says, sorry, there's the amount of work you've done today in your exercise books. What were you doing for the other half an hour? Well, what I was doing for the other half an hour was actually more vitally important and probably made more difference to that child than the task that I had for. And that's having that ability sometimes to have the support to be able to do that. But I think a lot of it now in education is just geared towards ticking the box, underlining the title, what's in your books. And I don't think that the things that we can do sometimes are unmeasurable. The impact that we have can be unmeasurable, but the problem is people are trying to measure the unmeasurable. Yep. And then what you're doing is sticking to the things that can be measured and forgetting then the things that are unmeasurable. Yep. And I think that's society saying through us one thing, but the current system in schools saying something different. Before we go, two things before we go. We didn't say yes or no to maths at 18. Do you think we should be teaching maths at 18? Yes or no?
Maths, no. Functional numeracy in some kind of guise, yes.
Agreed.
Which is kind of what I think we've got anyway. Is that because if I look at my subject, business studies, I think that 10% of that is already finance, for example, accounting. So you do in geography, you do data anyway, don't you?
Oh, data statistics.
Yeah, we talked about economics has got it in, maths itself, psychology. So there's probably only a few subjects that don't
all
have
the sciences
don't have.
And if you look at the majority of children take 3 or 4 A levels, I'd say of those 3 or 4 A levels, they're definitely going to have someone. And I'd agree.
I thought Ofqual put stuff in anyway. So I'm as I said, we don't know what was meant. Was it just? It was meant to be said. But what was he actually? We don't. Again,
I think 2 things have happened. I think the media has hung upon something and misconstrued it slightly. But then that's bad communication from the Prime Minister, because he should have had. Here's my plan. It's almost like I had an idea. Here's my idea, and you think, well, no, we don't want ideas in education. We actually would rather have. What are you going to do? What's the plan? Don't tell us the ideas. Fully cost it. Fully organise it, fully do it. We've had enough of these spitballed ideas, focus groups, let's give us something we can actually do. And if his idea is to make sure that children up to the age of 18 get some functional numeracy, and they have in each subject that they teach, have an aspect, like we do at GCSE, you have to put numeracy in. I have to get numeracy into history. That's fine. I don't mind that. See, literacy, but I find it a really strange hill to die on, because I would have went for the literacy more than the numeracy, to be honest. I would have went for both.
But maybe we can have this conversation.
Which one?
Another day around.
Do we have the left brain on one side, the right brain on the other side?
Well, we do, because we had this. Sorry, we're going way over here. Sorry to the guys at Teacher Talk Radio. If another show's program, because we're running out. We are going to get to our. If you load up the sponsors and stuff, I'll just kind of give you this story. We went to last night. My younger daughter came down, petrified, because my other daughter had decided to, just before bed, tell her the possibility of a black hole in the universe. Now, mathematical elder daughter finds it fascinating as a mathematical scientific conundrum. My more creative English right brain freaked out. What? There's nothing on the other side. How can someone with huge imagination suddenly process nothing?
And yet come from the same household, same parents, same environmental upbringing, and yet that's the natural. I mean, that's the thing. I sit between both. I can go right brain and left brain. That's why I started out as a geographer. I'm more towards the right brain now. But I do understand the general gist of what he was trying to say. We want kids to have better numeracy, and mathematics is important. Absolutely, especially in the world we're living in now with algorithms and many other things. But for me, we used to do this in PHSE. All those years ago, when I used to be in charge of PHSE, about 2009, 2010, the mathematics departments had to have functional numeracy. They used to teach percentage. I don't know what happened between 2010 and now, but they used to be a strong part of the maths curriculum. About financial capability.
Let's come back to it. Let's get some maths experts with us.
Well, financial capability, I think, is important. Okay. But anyway, right. So
let's get the guys paid from teachers.
Yes. Couple of things. We are sponsored by John Catt, and I've had a look at some of their absolute catalogue, and there's some fantastic books in there. Really worth a look at John Catt Publishing. And again, one of the things that Hattie says is to make sure your professional development is up to date. So you can keep your professional development up to date by going to John Hattie Publishing. And John Hattie Publishing is our sponsor at the moment. We also would like some of you to step up, if you could, and do what we're doing. Become a presenter, because that's one of the things about Teacher Talk Radio. It is run by teachers for teachers who are all different backgrounds as well, and we teachers obviously buy into this because that's what we're intrinsically motivated to do. We like doing this and we enjoy doing this, so you could join us as well, and you could also be a guest. So if you're interested in some of the topics, you can sign up to be a guest in Teachers Talk Radio. You can also sign up to be a host, a co-host like ourselves. And equally, we're always looking for new presenters. So John Catt Education gives us as this sponsor, and they're publishers of guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools and beyond. So please check them out, and you'll visit them at johncattbookshop.com and explore the full range. Some cracking titles for your CPD, so please check that out. You can also listen to this as a download, and we have a full roster today of another couple of shows coming up as well. And you can listen to any of our shows on Teachers Talk Radio, and you can download them on where you get your downloads from. So thank you for your sorry for running over, but this is what happens when two mates get to the fat and educate. There was actually a lot of 5 or 6 things that I could have talked about, which we'll try.
92 slides you got there?
I've got 92 slides of
Could go on. Maybe we should do like an extra slice.
I could go all day. You just put 50p in the slot. I'm like meatloaf. Remember, I would do anything for loaf. I used to stick that in the jukebox, right? I used to put that in the jukebox because I'd get 50p, right? And I could get 5 songs on the jukebox, and it lasted 9 minutes 37 seconds long. I would have a full hour of "I would do anything."
Right, I'm going to cut him off. Happy New Year, everyone. I'll see you next Sunday.
Live from Derbyshire, this is The Sunday Lunch Show with Brent Poland. And you are listening live.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.